The city has a tense atmosphere. The faces of its inhabitants are marked by anxiety about climate change and rising threats. The snow, falling thicker, covers the streets and roofs of the houses, while the lanterns struggle to keep the city lit. The group, headed for the Druid village, stops in front of the dense city notice board, filled with pleas for help from the citizens of Tourmaline and surrounding villages. A silver reward offered for downing a pair of Yetis in the Western Ridge, reads a flyer. I offer fertile land and 2 chickens to anyone who can retrieve my paintings from a band of bandits. And missing person. My husband has been gone for 2 weeks. He went to chop wood and hasn't returned. Ceria clenches the scarf in her hand, feeling a pit in her stomach. What's that little sister? Asks Sigrud to Fjorna, who holds a torn poster from the board. Urgent assistance needed in the village of Snowypumpkin. Every evening, mysterious creatures from the mountains raid our crops, kill our farmers, and kidnap our women. We ask for help. Fjorna reads, this request comes from a village on our way. I suggest we take the job to better know our abilities, in case of future combat, she says, turning to Zephira, who replies, if we split the payment equally, there are no problems. Ceria, worried about wasting precious time, grits her teeth, but understanding Fjorna's request says, all right, it's still about helping people. And so, the group leaves the city of Tourmaline to its icy drizzle. The road to Snowypumpkin is covered with a layer of snow never seen so high. Fjorna and Sigrud, used to such terrain, lead the group while Ceria struggles to keep pace. The snowy landscapes of Icewind Dale show vast expanses of white, interrupted only by sporadic bare trees and icy rock formations. After 2 hours of walking, Fjorna notices Ceria is shivering from the cold. Without saying anything, she nods to Sigrud, who begins to recite a prayer. The cold strengthens us, generates fear that sharpens the senses, and allows us to show our true potential by fueling the flame in our hearts. Then, a fireball appears behind his back, warming the surrounding air. Thank you, Mr. Sigrud, says Ceria, rubbing her hands near the fire. Mr. Sigrud, repeats Fjorna, chuckling. Miss Zephira, would you like a favor? Asks Ceria. I don't need it, replies the tiefling. I can manipulate the temperature of the brass in my vials to generate heat. Ceria begins to feel out of place, sensing the huge gap between her and the adventurers, as if her desire to accompany them was just a silly whim. But not losing heart, she steps firmly and continues to walk. After a day of walking, the group finally arrives at Snowypumpkin. The village presents itself as a poor and devastated community. The houses, built rudimentarily, show signs of hurried repairs. The inhabitants, wrapped in worn rags and furs, watch the group with suspicion and distrust. The few and clearly exhausted guards let them pass without asking anything. The mayor, a man with an unkempt beard and big dark circles under his eyes, recognizes the poster in their hands and welcomes them with cautious courtesy. He invites them into his modest hut, where he offers them boiled hot wine. Thank you for coming, he says with a weary voice. Our situation is desperate. Tourmaline has never helped us, especially not now when aid is sent to more profitable settlements. We are humble people, mainly producing pumpkins and goat's milk, or at least we did until those monsters slaughtered our livestock. Do you know what they are? Asks Zephira. We believe they might be some subspecies of goblin, but they attack only at night. We can't see them well. Our people aren't used to fighting creatures with edged weapons. Until now, we only feared the foxes that feasted on our poultry. Why must we suffer this? Shouts the mayor, slamming his fist on the unstable table, causing his wine glass to spill. Those beasts have killed so many good boys, so many great husbands. And the women, they take them to their lair in the mountains. We've tried to save them, but the snow covers the tracks too quickly. I am terrified and disgusted just thinking about what might have happened to them. He then takes the ladle and pours himself another glass. We have no money. Not to give you if we want to survive this harsh winter, but I have some artifacts that might. Zephira finishes her glass, and clearly uninterested in what the village has to offer, urges, searching their lair is pointless. We'll set a trap for them tonight. Tell your men to follow our instructions. Night falls quickly over Snowypumpkin, and the guards and citizens are positioned inside the stables. They are weak, malnourished men covered in bandages, but the motivation to avenge what they have lost is not lacking. In the whistle of the wind, The tension rises as the group waits hidden behind a barricade to the north. It isn't long before shadows between the trees start to move. Small and agile silhouettes, they cautiously approach a buffet specifically created for them, consisting of cabbages, pumpkins, and some reluctantly offered salted ham. The creatures, armed with axes and clubs, suspect a trap, but hunger drives them forward. Zephira gives the signal and ignites a circle of brass previously poured around the food, preventing the enemies from escaping. The flames reveal grotesque beings. Goblins with thick white-striped fur, wearing primitive armor made of leather and wrought iron, and a hungry grunt. Sigrud, wielding his flaming double axes, charges forward, shouting and giving courage to the citizens armed with pitchforks following him. Trapped between the fire and the fury of the barbarian-pyromancer, the goblins are defeated one after the other, unprepared. Sigrud fights with a fluid style as if it were a dance, leaving fiery trails behind his attacks. The advance is halted by an ice dart thrown by a more imposing goblin, apparently their leader, a shaman warrior capable of countering Sigrud's fire with icy magic. Fjorna and Zephira attack from both sides, trying to surround the creatures. Fjorna wields a heavy two-handed flaming axe, instilling terror in the enemy ranks. Zephira extracts brass from her alchemical vials and manipulates it as if it were boiling liquid. Despite injuries from fangs and axes, the adventurers' strength infuses courage in the farmers who shout and push their pitchforks with a determination they have never had in their lives. Even Bip-Bop attacks with electric shocks, protecting the injured from a couple of goblins. Ceria is trembling, trying to aim and shoot, but her laser beam misses the enemy and knocks her to the ground. As the goblin is about to strike her chest with a blunt axe, a fireball blasts it away, scorching its right arm. Fjorna grabs Ceria's hand and pulls her to her feet. "Stay behind me," she commands. Then a wave of heat floods the battlefield as Sigrud invokes a powerful pyromantic spell, generating fiery beams swirling around him. "Megantarion!" the warrior shouts. The fire morphs into a huge saber-toothed tiger, which growls and pounces on the goblin leader with an explosion, carbonizing him. The demotivated other goblins die one by one until only one remains. Sigrud slashes its chest and lets it go. Then, together with Fjorna and Zephira, they chase it into the mountains to find their lair. At dawn, Ceria sees them return with bodies covered in cloth on their shoulders. Sadly, they are the girls who had been kidnapped. Not all, only those who could still be buried. They were Arctic goblins, Fjorna tells Ceria, looking at the corpse of one of the creatures. They live in various clans in the northern mountains. Compared to regular goblins, their skin is tougher, their metal forging and leather weaving are more refined, their dens are full of cave paintings made with azurite to tell the story of their family. Something must have driven them from their territory. They wandered for weeks looking for a place to shelter. They were hungry and afflicted. Probably most of their clan had been killed. These were the last survivors. Ceria adds nothing, feeling an ambiguous emotion, perhaps compassion. But it's not over yet. More clans may come if this climate doesn't change. The situation can only get worse. The next day, the mayor had organized a big party to celebrate the victory. Although the threat was eliminated, there was little to celebrate for the citizens who had lost their crops, their livestock, or their family members. But the desire to distract themselves was necessary for everyone. The night sky over Snowypumpkin is unusually clear. You can even see some stars. The hearth's warm pots where red wine, sweetened with honey and berries, is boiling. Music played on improvised instruments fills the air with simple yet catchy melodies. Ceria approaches Zephira, who has carved out a quiet space reading books atop a wooden crate. "Do the texts of Snowypumpkin have anything interesting to tell you?" Ceria comments with a smile. Zephira looks up from the books and responds with unabashed know-it-all attitude. "There are several encyclopedias on the local flora and fauna, but they're all terribly approximate and inaccurate. But learning about a particular culture's ignorance is always a way to increase one's knowledge, don't you think?" Ceria chuckles, taking a seat next to her. "Your alchemical skills were impressive last night. Where did you learn them? I'd like to know more about you." Zephira replies while continuing to read the pages of the book with sufficiency. "I grew up in a convent. I suppose my parents couldn't stomach my horns, so they abandoned me there," she laughs. I spent my days in the library studying alchemy to avoid listening to the ravings of the Reverend Father. At 16, I ran away to Easthaven, where I worked as an apprentice in a shop. My nature as a golden tiefling always evoked a mix of fear and fascination. I have never felt marginalized. Many of my friends and colleagues are wealthy tieflings or have tieflings as partners. And to the Easthavians, it doesn't matter if you have 2 horns and a tail when they want to take you to bed. In fact, they boast about it as if I were some kind of exotic trophy. I've used this to my advantage, advancing my career and creating alchemical formulas that I then sold to various merchant guilds. Ceria briefly struggles to grasp that she is speaking with such a powerful and charismatic person. Zephira turns a page and continues, I started my business by producing elixirs that fought off freezing, in high demand by the mining operations in Icewind Dale. After that, I focused on cosmetic extracts to magically alter the appearance of my wealthier clients. And in recent years, I have been studying feral creatures and how to combat their poisons. And why decide to become an adventurer? Asks Ceria. After a while, the study becomes too comfortable a refuge. I need to get my boots dirty, travel, and experience the wild nature of this world on my own horns. Plus, adventure itself is an inexhaustible source of inspiration for new alchemical research. Ceria nods and thanks Zephira for satisfying her curiosity, standing up to leave. You are very brave, the tiefling says to her from behind, leaving her surprised. You're a library mouse not used to the outside world, and yet you chose to take the risk to search for your father. Your quest is not a whim. Ceria stops, impressed by the woman's ability to read her soul. Thank you, she says without turning around. As the party continues, the warmth of the bonfires dances on the faces of the people gathered around one of the larger fires, where Sigrud is recounting one of his exploits. Among the group, many children with wide eyes hang on his lips. And there I was, facing the snow giant, as tall as 2 trees stacked on top of each other, exclaims Sigrud, raising his arms to emphasize the stature of his opponent. With one hand, I blocked his enormous hammer, and with the other, I wielded my flaming axe, and with a single precise strike, I cut his leg as if it were butter. Then I summoned the spirit of the fiery bison to smash his skull with a headbutt. The children emit exclamations of astonishment and admiration, while some adults smile, knowing the barbarian's penchant for exaggeration. As Sigrud concludes the story, a resounding applause breaks out for the warrior who defeated the goblin chief. Ceria approaches, clapping her hands. Is that a true story? She asks. Only if you choose to believe it, replies Sigrud. The way you and your sister fight is spectacular. Sigrud accepts the compliment. Thank you. Fighting is in our nature, just as fire is part of our spirit. Tell me about your tribe. I don't know much about the pyromantic barbarians of Icewind Dale. Sigrud, clearly pleased to share the story of his people, puffs up his chest. We belong to the tribe of the Burning Hearts. We live in the northern lands of Icewind Dale, where the cold bites harder and fire is life. Our tribe is governed by a council of elders, each of them a pyromancer master in using a specific weapon. Our diet is primarily based on hunted meat, boars, reindeer, elk. We always cook it over the fire, which is sacred to us. Fire is not only a source of heat, but also the energy to generate our pyromantic powers. From a young age, we learn to manipulate flames, fear flames, respect flames. It is a vital part of our survival and heritage. Ceria listens, fascinated. Our biggest holiday is the Crimson Solstice, where various clans gather to cook around a large bonfire, the mammoths they have hunted. The feast lasts 3 days and nights. There are strength tests, drinking contests, and naturally stories of battles accumulated throughout the year. It is a tribute to Ramses, our god of fire and war. I would love to see it in person, says Ceria. I thought our lifestyle was too rough for an archaeologist like you. Ceria nudges Sigrud's elbow in a friendly manner. As both notice that some young maidens are twirling their braids, eager to get to know the warrior who saved the village closer, Ceria gets up and leaves Sigrud in the arms of his admirers. Turning the corner, Ceria nearly collided with a man who had just been thrown out of a tavern from which loud chaos was emanating. Inside, the mighty Fjorna was defeating one villager after another in arm wrestling. She raises her hands and shouts proudly after demolishing her latest opponent. Ceria, join the festivities! Drink! she says to Ceria, clearly tipsy, forcing her to drink a jug of beer. Ceria wipes the foam from her lips, having never drunk beer before. It's bitter. How do people drink this stuff? She wonders. And now let's arm wrestle, the barbarian declares. No, Now, she yells at her. Before Ceria can voice another protest, she finds herself sitting across from Fjorna, her hand gripped in hers. Bip-Bop, flying nearby, tries to help Ceria by subtly pushing her arm with a small integrated rocket. The match, accompanied by the vulgar chorus of the audience, is clearly uneven. Fjorna plays with the girl's wrist like a child with an ant, then a wave of sleepiness hits her. Enough, I'm sleepy, she exclaims, lets herself be defeated, sending the crowd into a frenzy, and collapses to the ground among the dirt and mud. Come here, lie down next to me, she asks Ceria. Perhaps driven by alcohol, the elf complies, and both gaze at the rotting wood of the ceiling while the world spins around them. You know, I'm the strongest in my village, says Fjorna, but that's not enough to become one of the elders. It's frustrating. They only want men, but I will change this archaic rule. And how do you plan to do that? Ceria asks, rolling her tongue between her teeth, wondering what it tastes like. But after all, what is a tongue? In my tribe, Fjorna replies, there is only one way to eliminate, rewrite, or add one of our rules. And that's by killing an ancestral mammoth. They are not just any mammoths, they are creatures that have lived for hundreds of years and can generate powerful glacial magics. When one of these is brought down, a new settlement is built on its territory. Our father in search of glory was killed by one of these creatures before my brother and I were even born. And you intend to avenge him? Ceria asks as she looks at her fingers. Are there really so many? Has she always had so many? You know what? I don't care about that weakling. I wouldn't have known what to do with such a father. Lucky you, I can't live without my father, replies Ceria, her eyes drooping. Fjorna leans over and watches her fall asleep with almost a maternal face, then picks her up and places her on the comfortable bed of the inn. Rest is needed. Tomorrow there is much road to cover. Father Bernardon advances through the grove, his webbed feet sinking into the fresh snow as the moonlight barely illuminates his staggering path. He mutters to himself in a drunken voice, "When I bring them the ferocious polar bear that terrorized the river, they will beg for my forgiveness," he says, sobbing. He stops, staring with bleary eyes at the small animal he holds in his hands. "Are you sure you're a bear?" he murmurs. In front of him, a mountain hare wriggles, finally escaping his grasp, making Bernardon jump in fright. The cleric, an albino platypus dressed in worn clerical robes, gets back on his feet and continues walking, casting one last curse at some mispronounced deity. A few steps from his parish, the silence of the night is broken by an unusual sound, giant footsteps that make the ground tremble. Bernardon quickens his pace, but it's too late. His parish has been destroyed, the village abandoned. Kesim, Dara, Ormatil! He cries out the names of his orphans, but there is no response. He kneels, overwhelmed by despair. In the distance, he sees immense figures moving away, giant metallic monsters. The sound of their footsteps is all that remains in the air.